In the mid-19th century, Henry David Thoreau moved into a small, self-built cabin in the Massachusetts woods. He lived alone, refused to pay his poll tax, and spent exactly one night in jail. By the traditional metrics of his era, he was an isolated eccentric, a man who deliberately severed his ties with society and retreated from public life. Yet his writings became the operating manual for the 20th century's most effective political figures. Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Nelson Mandela all explicitly cited his work to build their movements. How does a man who intentionally avoids human interaction create the blueprint for mass political resistance? He constructed this framework by merging American concepts of individual liberty with ancient Eastern theology. By tying ancient scripture to modern political defiance, he demonstrated that a solitary individual can forge enough ideological weaponry to move millions. When Thoreau moved to Walden Pond, his goal was to test a concept he called spiritual economics, to see what happens when a person strips away every superfluous physical comfort. While in isolation, he immersed himself in translated Eastern texts, specifically studying the laws of Manu and the Bhagavad Gita. He found a practical application for these scriptures. When Thoreau wrote about the physical act of throwing out old furniture and clothing, he was mirroring the Vedic concept of the soul casting off worn-out bodies to renew itself. The deep, clear water of Walden Pond became his physical metaphor for uncovering the Atman, the true inner self buried under the debris of daily life. He equated the physical act of waking up in the morning to the Vedic dawn of knowledge, a moment where the ice of spiritual winter thaws and clarity takes over. Instead of viewing the individual as a small cog that must fit into the machinery of the state, Thoreau argued that the purified human consciousness is the actual center of the universe. The Walden experiment proved that thousands of years of abstract theological thought could be lived, day by day, in the woods of New England. But a purified conscience creates a practical problem. If you align your inner self with a higher truth, you can no longer pay taxes to a government that funds the Mexican-American War and enforces human slavery. This moral friction pushed him to write the essay Civil Disobedience. He established a strict rule. When the laws of the state conflict with a higher moral law, the individual is obligated to break the state's law. 6 decades later, a young lawyer named Mahatma Gandhi sat in a South African jail cell, imprisoned for refusing to register under a discriminatory colonial law. Inside that cell, Gandhi read Thoreau's essay. He later wrote that the text provided scientific confirmation for the exact methods of protest he was already testing. Gandhi took Thoreau's personal pursuit of radical simplicity and scaled it into a weapon of economic warfare against the British Empire. Where Thoreau had grown his own beans to avoid the commercial market, Gandhi mobilized millions of Indians to use the traditional spinning wheel to boycott imported British textiles and bankrupt the colonial supply chain. When Gandhi traveled to London, he arrived wearing his simple homespun cloth, a stark visual rejection of the empire's mechanized power. This strategy reached its peak during the 1930 Salt March. Thousands of citizens walked to the sea to harvest their own salt, directly and physically breaking the British tax law. The private diary entries of a solitary thinker in the American woods had been successfully adapted into a tactical manual that dismantled an entire empire. The geography of this idea forms a complete loop. Ancient texts traveled from India to the American Northeast to shape Thoreau's mind. His resulting essays then traveled to South Africa and back to India to shape Gandhi's revolution. This map shows us that a person can retreat from society without abandoning it. To effectively resist an unjust system, you first have to do the quiet, rigorous work of mastering yourself. The tools required to dismantle the giants of the outward world are consistently found by looking deeply inward.